Hello. Thank you for listening. This is the near-death experience of Marijan, and her experience occurred on June 18th of 2013. Open quote. I got bacterial pneumonia. It was an unknown bacterium in Croatia, and they could not identify it. Doctors at the hospital for lung diseases said that the disease develops from it several times faster than the known strains. When I arrived at the hospital, the lungs were working with less than 10% capacity because they were full of pus, and only the top of the right lung was visible on the x-ray. I arrived at the hospital around 9 p.m. That part of the bed where the headboard was raised, so I was in fact in a half-lying, half-sitting position. I was completely awake and didn't even close my eyes. I looked at my watch and it was 5 minutes past midnight, and then it happened. On the opposite side of the room, on the left side of the wall I was looking at, was a closet, and next to it a table and 2 chairs. Suddenly, a lighted hallway appeared where the closet, table, and chairs had been. The hallway was about 4 feet high, floor to ceiling, and just as wide. It was completely flat, and so long that it looked like it ended at a point. The light did not come from any lighting, but all 4 surfaces, the left and right walls, and the ceiling and the floor, were illuminated. They looked like they were made of some milky white glass lit by yellowish neon tubes. The light began to go out in segments of about 10 meters from the beginning of the corridor to the other end, which was visible only as a distant point. At first I got scared and mechanically cursed. What is this? Well, I don't dream. I'm fully awake. Am I crazy? The lighted hallway was still sinking into darkness in segments, and in the part that was no longer lit, only a dark outline remained. After the initial shock passed me by, I embarked on an action to shed light on that phenomenon. I first checked that I hadn't accidentally fallen asleep for a while, so I dream about it, but I didn't. There was still noise in the hallway, and a light was on. I looked around the room, and everything was in place. Nothing else changed except that lighted hallway appeared. The hallway was still there. The lights had already gone out very far away, so that it was barely noticeable that they were still going out, but the outlines of the dark hallway were clearly visible. Before the lights went out completely, I had already recovered from the initial shock and tried to think rationally. In this extremely shocking and incredible fact, I was looking for a logical cause. Meanwhile, as I regained my composure and began to think rationally, the hallway lit up again in full splendor and began to turn off again on the same principle as before. There was no doubt that I was awake and fully aware. Everything but the half wall that now occupied the hallway was in place. They are still shouting in the hospital hallway. I think rationally now, without panic, but I can still see quite clearly that lighted corridor that is going out again. So the only logical fact came to my mind. The process of extinguishing life had begun, and the brain is sending a signal that I see as that infinitely long corridor sinking into darkness. I didn't have the feeling that I needed to walk down that hallway, but that it was a depiction of the process of my dying. Then I had a strong feeling that part of me was trying to separate from my body. As time went on, I had a growing feeling that he had already partially separated. I could even guess the outline of my body, but as a completely transparent figure slowly coming out of my body and straightening into a sitting position. It was more visible in the slightly distorted background image because I was looking through it. Well, it's not possible that I'm going to die now. Me, who who until a few days ago was completely healthy and strong as a bull, and from some pneumonia from which people don't even die anymore. However, again, that is the only logical solution to this dual situation that I see and experience. The lights were still off, and only the farthest part of the hallway was still lit. I'm 59 years old, and it is not time to die, especially not for a healthy person. I would definitely like to live more, but again, even if I die, it is a consolation to me that I have lived a really intense and diverse social, private, and business life, which few people have. Hell. While I was feverishly thinking about my situation, convinced that I was dying because the soul was already leaving my body, the lighting in the hallway went out again. But now the situation has changed drastically. The shock I experienced when I saw the lighted hallway was a pale shadow over the shock I experienced then, and which shook me as if I had touched a 1,000,000-volt current. I was no longer in the room, but in a completely different location. The feeling of being in the middle of a flame struck me like lightning. I was in a space that at first glance looked like a large cave filled with flames. Hell? Question. The colors were mixed and ranged in shades of darker red, brighter red, orange, and yellow, just what the colors of a strong fire are. I was standing on an elevated part of that huge cave which was descending and forking below me, and it was all filled with flames. Below, on one plateau, were several black figures. I swore fiercely. So is there really a hell? Did I die and go to hell? Are those black characters servants in hell? And why did I, who all my life tried to live honestly and not hurt anyone, end up in hell? By the way, I didn't believe in that kind of hell. It took a while until I came to myself from the shock. I first noticed that it is not hot at all, but the temperature is normal. Then I took a closer look around and found that these bright colors were no flames, but the environment looks like. Not even those black characters stabbed the glowing fairies of some sinful soul as they trumpeted to me in my childhood describing hell, but talk. In the meantime, not to walk, I approached those black characters. It was only then that I looked at where I actually was. I stood on a smooth but uneven light brown rock, and in front and to the left were also vertical rocks, so that above them nothing more could be seen. The rocks were in colors described, and after I got rid of the hellish shock, they looked really beautiful. These were the warm colors that are most beautiful to me. Then I paid attention to the people in black. One, I call him Boss, capital B, was standing about 3 feet and a little to the right in front of me, and 3 were standing about 10 feet away, straight ahead. They were dressed in cloaks, which reached almost to the ground, and had large hoods on their heads. These cloaks looked like those worn by the Franciscan friars, but they were almost completely black. Only a faint shade of brown was noticeable. I looked at the boss, a little askew from behind, but I looked the 3 of them directly in the face. Why face? They didn't have faces at all. Where their faces were supposed to be, there was absolute blackness, without the slightest outline, so black that it bounced hard from their black clothes. Their sleeves were long, and their fists were not visible. The boss spoke and gestured with his hands, and the 3 of them stood still and listened. Even though I was standing near the boss, I didn't hear anything he was saying. Suddenly, it became clear to me where I was. Here is the boundary across which one passes into another dimension, another reality, another form, another world, another life. I don't know how to define it exactly. I even moved to that border for a while and looked at it. It was like a light gray silk curtain, reaching infinitely in height and constantly swaying slightly. I have no knowledge of what it looks like beyond that limit, but I have learned that there is nothing wrong with it. Rather, there is a more sublime continuation of existing life. My death will not happen, and it will be the end, but only the body, which was my host in this life, will die, while I will experience a transformation into another form and continue the continuity that lasts forever. For a short time, I also had a vision of the eternal flow in which all existing life moves. I could clearly see that this flow had several levels between which a gap could be seen. There were about 10 levels, and somehow I knew that those levels were not the same, but that it was, in fact, a gradation, and that the highest level was the best. And that course is everything that has been and will be. Earthly life is only a short-lived excursion from that flow. But even this flicker in relation to eternity determines at what level, after the physical death of the body, the continuity of life of man will continue. I also knew that if I crossed the border, there was no going back to this life. Crossing the border is a one-way street. But I also knew that even though I had reached the limit, and the soul had already left the body, it was not yet over with my earthly life. The boss decides to switch, and may decide to return. I knew there weren't very good chances for that, but the possibility exists. I clung to that possibility. I knew crystal clear that across the border, let's call it that, a more perfect world, so I wasn't the least bit afraid. I went back to where the boss had been talking to those three for a while. This encouraged me greatly, because I hoped that the chief would still bring me back to my earthly life, since I had come to him again from the very border. I had time to think, and I was fully aware of my situation. The body is on the bed in the hospital, and I am waiting here for the chief to finish the conversation and make a decision about my further fate. I didn't have the feeling that the body was on the bed and I was in immaterial spirit or soul. I was there in full body shape and not dressed in a t-shirt and pajama bottoms like a body on the bed, but in my everyday clothes, jeans, and a t-shirt. I was already thinking completely rationally and with a cool head. Quote, I have nothing to complain about. I myself did not cause a situation that resulted in the most likely death. I did not drive too fast or carelessly to cause an accident in which I would be killed, nor did I do anything else recklessly, which would result in this situation in which I have found myself. I just picked up a bacterium. I got sick from somewhere in the air, most likely at some busy airport where people from all over the world crowd. I didn't even wait to go to the doctor, which would certainly have happened if I hadn't coughed up blood. Close quote. Quote, open quote, I would definitely still like to live the existing life. I am still in full strength, all bodily functions serve me well, and as ridiculous as it sounds, I feel young. I have time to cross the border. I will not escape anywhere. The continuity of being, which I am now convinced of, lasts forever, and earthly life is short, so I could live a little longer. But if the chief decides otherwise, what can I do? Close quote. Although that's close quote totally. There's quotes there. I'm not sure exactly if he's speaking to the chief or these are thoughts that he has that he wants to convey to the chief. As he has these thoughts, the chief probably knows these thoughts, so they are in open quotes. But all of this is the story. So let's go back to it. Open quote. Although I still wanted to live the life I had already left, it was not the most important thing to me. I've really lived and experienced things that the vast majority of people don't even come close to experiencing. By then, I had traveled to about 50 countries. I've seen unimaginable beauties and experienced wonderful moments. So if I really have to die, and I'm not too sorry. But I am terribly sorry for my wife, and especially my daughter. My daughter is preparing to take over the running of the company from me, and she is still far from taking over the reins on her own. If I die so suddenly, it will be an unspeakable shock for them, and they will have to take over the running of the company immediately and perform even more complicated procedures of official takeover and transfer of property. They will have no idea that I will continue to exist, but will reckon that I have died and that this is the end and mourn for me. That thinking made me very sad, and I anxiously waited for the decision of the boss, who was just finishing the conversation. He crossed his arms at waist height and then waved them outward, which was a sign that he was done. And then I came to the agenda. The character who stood closest to me pointed to me and said, "What are we going to do with him?" The boss turned to me and measured me twice from head to toe. I could study him well now, for he was facing me, and he was close. There was not the slightest outline of the face, only complete blackness. I had a feeling like I was looking into infinite dark depths. "Let it stay," said the chief. I was overwhelmed with euphoric joy and gratitude. I will still live my life. I will not shock and sadden the family, and I will help my daughter to fully prepare to take over the firm. Let him think for as long as he can, I thought. Jesus. I found myself on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Since I also traveled to the Holy Land, I knew exactly where I was. I was in the vicinity of the present-day town of Tabgha. There are the Church of the Loaves and Fish and the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter, but the time was not present, but 2,000 years ago. In the open space, a few feet in front, and again a little to the right, Jesus stood and spoke to the crowd, as it is always mentioned in the Bible. The crowd was 30-40 people. Now freed from the burden of the certainty of death, I felt great joy that I have the good fortune and privilege to personally attend such an event, although I cannot call myself a believer in the classical sense. I studied Jesus carefully, trying to remember every detail. Jesus was my height, a few centimeters lower, so between 175 and 180 centimeters. He was dressed in a robe of unpainted linen, not white, but a slightly yellowish hue. He had dark brown sandals on his feet. His hair was light brown and reached to his shoulders, so I immediately thought that in pictures and movies he is always shown with long hair, and he is not there at all. He was of normal body constitution, perhaps even a little thin. The audience was very different from him in appearance. They were all shorter, of stronger constitution, dark-skinned, and had black hair. They were dressed in tunics that reached just below their knees, made of coarser material and even darker shades, and some were even colored. Jesus spoke of the need to believe in God, in God's order, in other people, and in love and understanding among people. He emphasized the need to believe in the good, but not only to believe, but to do good deeds and live accordingly. Words themselves or declarations in accordance with the enumerated nonsense do not mean anything without deeds. One should do good deeds and live according to these principles. One should live in love and harmony with other people and spread positive energy through words and deeds. He said that all people are equal before God and should act accordingly. He kept repeating that only faith in God, faith in love among people, living by these principles, doing good deeds, and showing love to others bring reward at the end of life. Although all who adhere to these principles will be rewarded for their good deeds, and especially those who still in this life experience the knowledge of connection with God. He has mentioned several times that life is eternal and that the position of every man after death depends on the behavior and deeds done in this life. He talked about all people being connected to God. They just need to experience the knowledge of it. Everyone will experience it, but only at the moment of death. Those who come to this realization while they are still alive are extremely lucky, but in order to reach this realization, they must deserve it with their faith, effort, and deeds. He constantly emphasized that people should behave in accordance with the principles he spoke of in order to receive a reward for those deeds when the time came. One of the audience asked, "And will it really be like that?" "It will be when I say so," Jesus said in a slightly raised voice. After that, we found ourselves in another place. Again, Jesus was giving a similar speech, and the schedule, as we stood, was the same as the first time. Again, someone who was not entirely convinced of what Jesus was saying asked a similar question. Jesus also answered him in a slightly raised voice, and we found ourselves in a new location again. After the third case, in which the scenario from the first two was repeated, it became clear to me that I was always attending the same segment of Jesus' speech. Jesus describes how people should behave, what to believe, and how to live in order to be rewarded at the end of life. And someone in the audience doubts the truth of those words and asks a similar suspicious question. Well, these parts of Jesus' speech that I attend seem to be meant for me, because I don't literally believe in those descriptions and interpretations as religions presented them, I thought. Jesus turned to it and looked at me for a few moments. Then I could study it better. He had light blue eyes and a mild and enigmatic, somewhat dreamy look. His face was straight, framed by a youthful beard, 3 or 4 centimeters long. It was not overgrown in the chin, but a narrow band of chin ran down the ears to the jaws, where it widened a little and merged with that part on the chin itself, which was thicker and a little longer. The mustache was connected to the chin in a thin line, and below the lower lip was a slightly wider tuft, also connected to the chin. On each side of that tuft was an overgrown white skin. His skin was extremely light and bounced strongly from the dark skin of the listener. Close quote. That was pretty amazing. Great description. I have to read that again later on. Open quote. After that, we moved to new locations twice more, and the scenario was always similar. The event took place outdoors and was attended by between 20 and 50 people. Jesus spoke of slightly different things each time, but in the same context. He kept repeating that all people are connected to God. They just need to experience the knowledge of it. Everyone will experience it, but only at the moment of death. Those who come to this realization while they are still alive are extremely lucky, but in order to reach this realization, they must deserve it with their faith, effort, and deeds. He also spoke about the importance of love and understanding among people, about the equality of all people, and the need to do good deeds and to live in harmony with people and nature, belief in God, and God's order. All who adhere to these principles will be rewarded for their good deeds, and especially those who still in this life experience the knowledge of connection with God, He mentioned every time that life is eternal and that his position after death depends on the behavior and deeds of every man. He always mentioned negative things as well. He spoke of the hypocrisy of people who say one thing and do another, of falsely portraying their person to gain a reputation in society or material things. The worst are those who loudly point out that they adhere to certain beliefs and virtues and even call for the condemnation of others, when in reality they do the opposite themselves. But God, who knows more about man than he himself, cannot be deceived. At the end of life, the real truth will be known. That is why it is important that life, behavior, and actions be in accordance with positive principles, because this will bring a reward at the end of life. In no speech did Jesus mention any punishment for those who do not behave as he preached. He always just emphasized that those who live according to what he narrated will be rewarded. He never once mentioned any restrictions that people should adhere to. Exactly the opposite. All his speeches were imbued with statements that people should strive to spend their lives in pleasure, because only a satisfied man has positive energy, but not to strive for some selfish pleasure, which man will enjoy without regard to the environment, but for pleasure that includes others, which has a positive effect on others, with whom in communion man creates positive energy. He also never once mentioned any religious characteristics or the need to respect some religious regulations. He did not mention any connection with God at all. He kept repeating about the need to believe in God, in God's order, to believe in the good, to believe in the continuation of this earthly life, but not only about the need to believe, but also to live accordingly and do good deeds for life, and then there will be a reward for that. Jesus spoke in much more detail about the things I am describing, but I did not even bother to remember those minor details. First of all, at the beginning, I was so fascinated by the fact that I was attending Jesus' speech live that I did not pay too much attention to the facts themselves. With repeated sequences, I remembered all the important facts well. Probably because of that, I also attended more events. Even the ancient Romans had the saying, repetitio est mater studiorum. Repetition is the mother of learning. It did not occur to me then that I would write about it and that it would be interesting to have as many details as possible. All I had in mind was to tell my experience to as many people as possible and to convey to them the meaning of Jesus' statements. First, that all people are connected with God, and that at the moment of death, everyone will realize this. Secondly, that they should adhere to certain principles, and these are faith in God, love of people, kindness, honesty, positive energy, harmony with people and nature. Those who will strive in life to adhere to these principles as much as possible and live in accordance with them will be rewarded. Since it all took time together, I had time to think about both what I had listened to and what I had experienced while waiting for the chief's decision. I could now clearly illuminate the mystery of those levels of eternal flow, the vision I had. After death, everyone goes into that flow, but it depends on their level. Those who live a more positive life and are filled with positive energy will go to a higher level than they were before, and those with negative energy to a lower one. I was not shown the difference between these levels, but I clearly knew that there was a difference and that higher levels are more valuable. It has also not been shown to me in what form further existence continues, whether as an individual, bringing with it memories or merging with the energy of this level. I conclude that it still exists as an individual in that whole, because in my vision it was indicated to me that there is a possibility of moving to a higher level and being in it. Return. When the fifth sequence of my presence to the teachings of Jesus was over, I found myself in the hospital room again. It goes without saying that the experiences described earlier caused a storm in my psyche. Experiencing such amazing things, which I have never heard anyone would experience, caused a real avalanche of emotions. Although the doctor, a few months later, when I told him this, said those were hallucinations due to lack of oxygen, I am sure I really experienced them. Why am I so sure? Because I embarked on this adventure fully awake. I was awake all the time and fully aware of my real situation, but also the situation I was going through. At no point during the events described did I lose sight of the fact that I was on the verge of death in a hospital room, or that I had perhaps passing that edge. Apart from these shocking moments, when a lighted hallway appeared to me, or when I found myself in a place that at first I thought was hell, all the rest of the time I thought completely soberly, aware of the parallel unfolding of reality. In full consciousness, I experienced these amazing events. From shock and panicky fear when I saw the tunnel or when I thought I had come to hell, to complete calm when I realized that human existence does not end in death but transforms into another reality. Ardent desire to return to the present life, and huge joy when I attended Jesus' speeches. And why couldn't that happen? I was just an observer and someone in whose power it was a performer. And what do we humans know at all about the origin and functioning of the world and life? What do we know about reality of the universe? Our knowledge is less than a grain of dust in this endless desert. Countless times I turn these events in my head and analyze. If that teleportation had happened to me immediately, I would surely have thought that I was dreaming it, because I would not connect what I experienced with reality. But when I first looked at the lighted hallway and everything else was normal and in place, I undoubtedly found in full consciousness that I was awake, that my brain was functioning normally. However, the hallway was also completely real. I didn't have any urge or call to go down that hallway, but it made me think that life was starting to fade. I am therefore convinced that the apparition of the lighted corridor was only an introduction with the aim of preparing me for the events that followed. To the fact that the process of dying has begun, and to come to terms with that fact, my mind then opened up and I was able to move into another reality. For a long time I wondered to myself how I remained calm and thought in cold blood in such a situation. I got the answer from the results of my DNA analysis. I have a gene that is colloquially called warrior. Contrary to the name, this gene does not stimulate any warrior moods, but in difficult and dangerous situations allows a person to act rationally and in cold blood. But there are also warrior gene flaws. Everyday routines and jobs for such warriors are very boring and tiring. Maybe the doctor is partially right, but not in the sense that these were hallucinations caused by a lack of oxygen, but that the lack of oxygen opened a portal to another level of consciousness. The most famous prophecies from history took place in locations where there was a lack of oxygen in the air due to the evaporation of other gases. Death always begins with the act of stopping the heart and the flow of oxygen to the brain, but the act of dying itself does not happen on the principle of a power switch, so you turn off life with one click. Brain death occurs gradually, even if it is a matter of a few minutes. During this period, processes unknown to people occur. When the level of oxygen in the brain needs to sustain life exceeds a critical limit, portals open up towards some other realities and dimensions. Those who, like me, are lucky to return from that area to the local reality can witness these supernatural experiences. End quote. Wow. There was so many great points there. The description of the barrier, to go beyond the barrier, here's the barrier, the boundary across which no one passes into another dimension, another reality, another form, another world, another life. I don't know how to define it exactly. I even moved to that border for a while and looked at it. It was like a light gray silk curtain reaching infinitely in height and constantly swaying slightly. There have been other NDEs that we've read that I've wondered. They talk about the barrier, but they never really talk about the barrier. They don't describe the barrier. So this is one of the first times that I've heard the description of the barrier. The his description of the eternal flow as you come into heaven, the eternal flow, and I guess the levels. And he saw 10 levels, and then being transported to see Jesus speak to a group of people. That was pretty amazing. I hadn't heard that before, and some excellent words from Jesus. Really great. And the description of Jesus when he said that Jesus turned, here, quote, Jesus turned to it and looked at me for a few moments. That's exclamation mark there at the end. Then I could study it better. He had light blue eyes and a mild, enigmatic, somewhat dreamy look. Then he describes his face and his beard and his mustache and his skin complexion. And he also talks about Jesus' speech. And in no speech did Jesus mention any punishment for those who do not believe as he preached. He always just emphasized that those who live in according to what he narrated will be rewarded. He never once mentioned any restrictions that people should adhere to, exactly the opposite. All his speeches were imbued with statements that people should strive to spend their lives in pleasure, because only a satisfied man has positive energy, but not to strive for some selfish pleasure which man will enjoy without regard to the environment, but for pleasure that includes others, which has a positive effect on others, with whom in communion man creates positive energy. He also never once mentioned any religious characteristics or the need to respect some religious regulations. He did not mention any connection with God at all. He kept repeating about the need to believe in God, in God's order, to believe in the good, to believe in the continuation of the earthly life, but not only about the need to believe, but also to live accordingly and do good deeds for life, and then there will be reward for that, end quote. Kind of, when I'm reading that, thinking of the principles of physics where the parts, when put together and combined, are greater than the whole is greater than the individual parts themselves. So when you come together and you commune, you create that positive energy with other people and for other people, that it's more than just the positive energy that the two people could create on their own, two or more. There are a couple of questions here. Let's see if any of them shed any additional light on his story, on his adventure. Question: what emotions did you feel during the experience? Answer: I only felt fear when I thought I had died and gone to hell. As I waited for the chief's decision, I felt a great desire to come back to life and a concern for my family if I didn't come back. The moment I reached the limit of no return and gained knowledge of the existence of an eternal flow of life and the existence after physical death, I felt great satisfaction to be given the opportunity to see and learn something I had never heard anyone else experience. When I saw and listened to Jesus, I felt immense pleasure and peace. Question: did you suddenly seem to understand everything? Answer: everything about the universe. I saw the limit of life and learned that it was still possible to return, even though the soul had just left the body. But after the crossing, there is no return. However, it is not the end or going into nothingness, But beyond the border is another better world, higher level than the earthly, and the soul continues to exist in it. I have also seen the eternal flow of life energy from which everything comes and into it everything returns. Listening to Jesus, I learned that God is above all and that all people will become aware of it at the moment of death. It was especially emphasized that those who live according to human and God's laws will be rewarded in that life that follows earthly. Question: did you come to a border or point of no return? Answer: I came to a definite, conscious decision to return to life. I reached the border at my fingertips. I really wanted to come back to this life all the time. For myself, because I thought it was 59 years too early to die, but even more so for family. Just 5 days ago, I was completely healthy and strong, and my death would have been a huge shock to them. But the return was decided by the boss, so I fervently hoped he would decide that way. After returning from the border to those faceless people, I was almost certain that it would be so, but by no means did I expect to visit the Sea of Galilee 2,000 years ago before returning and see and listen to Jesus. What was your religion prior to your experience? Answer: other several faiths. I have believed before that there is a God, but I have believed that no religion depicts the real situation. I did not consider myself a believer in the sense that I belonged to a religion. Question: how is your religion now? Answer: other several faiths. I am now sure that there is a God, and that there is a connection between every man and God. I still find that faiths, at least the ones I know, don't show a realistic picture of God. Even now, I do not consider myself a believer, because to be a believer means to belong to a religion and not just to believe in God. Question: did your experience include features consistent with your earthly beliefs? Answer: not entirely consistent with the beliefs that I had at the time of the experience. I have thought before that life can be considered eternal. The reason is that everything that exists in the physical world is just energy, and energy is indestructible. It only appears in different forms. I felt that spirit and body were part of the same whole. At death, the mental part dies, and after death, the human body is transformed into some other matter or energy. But I did not think that the soul continues to exist in some other form after death, and especially not that life is part of the eternal flow from which it comes and into which it returns. Question: did you have a change in your values and beliefs because of your experience? Answer: yes. There were no I have tried to live according to humane principles before, but now I stick to them even more firmly, because I am convinced that these are only the fundamental principles of God. I had believed before that there was a God, but I believe that the general principles of the functioning of the universe, not individual human lives. I am now convinced that every human life is directly connected with God, and that after earthly death, the whole life of man immediately goes to evaluation. Question: did you seem to encounter a mystical being or presence or hear an unidentifiable voice? Answer: I encountered a definite being. I first met four beings. They were dressed in the habit of the Franciscans. They were just black. They had large hoods pulled over their heads. Instead of faces, there was absolute darkness, which bounced off their black clothes. Then I met Jesus and attended his speeches. There were between 30 and 50 people in the audience. Question: during your experience, did you gain information about universal connection or oneness? Answer: yes. I was shown the eternal flow of life energy. In him is all that was, all that is now, and all that will be. From it, all life comes and returns to it. A dozen levels were clearly visible, and I knew the higher levels were more valuable. From this, I later concluded, listening to Jesus about the reward after death, that those who deserve the reward go to a higher level of eternal life flow. Question. During your experience, did you gain information about the existence of God? Answer. Yes. Jesus kept saying that no one should believe in God. Sorry. Yes, Jesus kept saying that one should believe in God. That there is a God will be known to all at the moment of death. Those who come to this knowledge while they are still alive are extremely lucky. Jesus never once mentioned any of his roles in relation to God. He was just repeating that one should believe in God and in God's order and live accordingly. Those who live according to God's principles, do good deeds, and spread positive energy will be rewarded by God after death. Question. During your experience, did you gain special knowledge or information about your purpose? Answer. Yes. I had the feeling that I was given special knowledge because I was shown the last frontier of life. I was given the knowledge that beyond that limit there is a continuation of life, and I was shown the eternal flow of life. I also gained invaluable knowledge by listening to Jesus. I think that the purpose is to pass this knowledge on to as many people as possible. So I am about to finish the book entitled A View Over the Border of Life. Question. During your experience, did you gain information about the meaning of life? Answer. Yes. Jesus kept saying that people should believe in God, but also live according to God's principles. These principles are also humane principles. Only declarative faith in God means nothing, but is negative in God's eyes. Those who pretend to be great believers and do harm to others have been repeatedly mentioned as a very negative example. People need to do good deeds, live in love and respect with other people, but also in harmony with nature. Such a way of life creates and spreads positive energy. So I believe that this is the purpose and meaning of earthly life. And that's a close quote on that one. That's a great couple of statements to live by. Question. During your experience, did you gain information about an afterlife? Answer. An afterlife definitely exists, yes. When I reached the limit, I was made aware that life does not end with earthly bodily death, but continues in some other form. I knew clearly that beyond the border was another world, another dimension, another life. It was also made known to me that it is a higher and better form than existing life. For a moment, I was shown the eternal flow of life and life energy, in which everything that was, is, and everything that will be. I have not been shown in what form life goes on, but from Jesus' repetitions that persons who deserve it will be rewarded after death, I conclude that the soul will continue to exist as an individual in that higher world. Question. During your experience, did you gain information about love? Answer. Yes. Jesus kept saying that people should live in love with other people, but not only with loved ones, but with all people, and not only with people, but also with other living beings, and nature. Such a way of life creates balance and positive energy. Question. Have your relationships changed specifically because of your experience? Answer. Yes. They haven't changed in any drastic form, but they sort of have. I have a bit of a problem in communicating with people on a daily basis. I didn't like to discuss unimportant things that people are burdened with before, and now I find that repulsive. My brain and my consciousness are working at some higher level, and spending capacity on some completely unimportant things is unacceptable to me. Therefore, I have reduced the number of gatherings where this would happen. I used to love bellot cards and quarrel loudly with my partner or opponents, but now I have completely stopped playing cards, and I only play cards 2-3 times a year with one company. Since I didn't answer, they stayed and stopped calling me to play cards. Discussions about which card you should have thrown or not should now annoy me. I don't go to other places either where topics are just empty conversations. I want to live in balance, surrounded by positive energy, and I don't go to places where it would disturb me. Question. How accurately do you remember the experience in comparison with other life events that occurred around the time of the experience? Answer. I remember the experience more accurately. This experience cannot be compared to any other experience. More than 8 years have passed since that experience, and I remember absolutely everything as if it happened yesterday. The memory is so deeply etched that I remember even the smallest details. Question. Are there one or several parts of the experience that are especially meaningful or significant to you? Answer. There are more significant things. With this experience, I got an explanation of the things that were going on in my life before this experience. All my life, when I was alone and in complete peace and quiet, I had the feeling that someone else was present. It made me feel uncomfortable because I didn't know how to explain. Now I know that it was real, and that in those moments when I was undisturbed by external stimuli, I felt the presence of a parallel reality. Also, in the case of a car accident in my youth, witnesses told me that I stopped breathing at least 10 times and did not breathe for a few minutes. Then I would shake and start breathing. Then I attributed it to my physical strength and hard head. But now I know that someone decided to stay alive, as in this last case when I was fully aware of everything. It is especially significant that I realize that there is a continuation of life after death, and that life is connected with God all the time, and everything a man has done in life is recorded somewhere. Question. Have you shared this experience with others? Answer. Yes, I immediately shared the experience with others the same day. At first, probably no one trusted me too much, but when it turned out that I had survived such a stage of the disease that no one in the history of the hospital had survived, they began to look at it differently. Since I have been talking about it for 8 years and I've talked to hundreds of people, I can accurately describe the reactions. About 20% of the people don't believe it and say it's impossible. About half do not know what attitude to take. They think it might happen, but they're not sure because it sounds incredible to them. But about 30% of the people firmly believe and see the impact of my experience, especially in severely ill people who have some deadly disease like cancer. I notice great relief in them. I think for 2 reasons. The first is that I am proof that even the most deadly disease can survive. And second is that life continues in some form even after earthly death, and that it is all firmly connected with God. Question. Did you have any knowledge of near-death experiences prior to your experience? Answer. Yes, I have read many times over the decade that someone watched their body during a state of clinical death in surgery or accidents. They also mentioned that they went through a lighted hallway and eventually saw a divine light, divine beings, and their dead ancestors and relatives. It didn't affect my experience in any way because it was completely different and I didn't experience any of those usual things. But analyzing some events through life, I came to the conclusion that I had such an experience before. In a car accident, I stopped breathing about 10 times for a long time and then came back to life. This was told to me by several people who witnessed the event. I don't even remember any of it because I was in a deep unconsciousness. Still, the fact remains that I died a dozen times in a ditch by the road, and something always brought me back to life. But I remember the second event well. Only then I didn't think in the right way. When I fell into the Danube River and floated unconscious as the water currents dragged me towards the middle of the big river, I felt an incredible relief and joy. Then a part of the dark night sky lit up, and I heard a commanding voice. Marijan, swim and save yourself. I jumped up, raised my head, and saw that I was already a few dozen meters from the shore, where a taxi driver and a friend were standing in astonishment. I swam towards the shore and escaped. At the time, I didn't think at all that my face was submerged in water and I couldn't see the sky light up, nor that That commanding voice didn't belong to those two on the shore 100 yards away. Question. What do you believe about the reality of your experience shortly after it happened? Answer. Experience was definitely real. Experience was definitely real, except for two brief moments when I got scared, when I saw the lighted hallway, or when I thought I had died and come to hell. All the rest of the time, I was thinking logically and aware of the parallel unfolding of reality. The body is in the hospital, but I, as a person in full physical shape and dressed in my standard clothes, am on this incredible journey. I thought about what I saw and what was given to me to know, but also about my earthly life and the problems that my sudden death would bring to my family. All the while, I really wanted to get back to earthly life. Earthly life is short, and I wanted to live it still, and eternal life will not escape me anywhere. Question. What do you believe about the reality of your experience now? Answer. Experience was definitely real from the first moment. I was convinced that the experience was real, and after analyzing the events from the previous period, I also received additional evidence. If I came back to life in a car accident when the doctor declared me dead, or when I escaped from the Danube after hearing the order to swim and save myself, these are definitely the same experiences. If I've been brought back to life multiple times, it's definitely for some reason. When I saw that my experience helps people in difficult life situations, I keep talking about it. But I also came to the conclusion that maybe I should write a book to get as many people as possible acquainted with what I saw. I wrote the book, and I called it A View Over the Border of Life. Two more. Question. At any time in your life, has anything ever reproduced any part of the experience? Answer. Yes. Now I am aware of it. Prior to this experience, I often had the feeling that someone else was present watching me. Not anymore. I don't know how else to explain it than that some higher being somehow wanted to contact me. And now that I've seen them clearly and seen a piece of other reality, there's no need for that anymore. At the age of 8, the ghost of my grandfather, who died a few weeks ago, came to me, but the clearest experience was the call to swim and save myself when I was unconscious, floating down the Danube. Question. Is there anything else you would like to add about your experience? Answer. Even though it's been 8 years since the experience, I've been thinking about it all the time. I first sought an explanation as to why an experience had happened to me. I was unable to find them, except that perhaps the reason was that my whole life I tried to live by the principles that Jesus repeatedly mentioned. But even that was a thin reason for me, because a lot of people try to live by those principles. At least I hope so. After dozens of people told me that God had brought me back to life because I had some assignment, I began to wonder if that might really be the case. Coming to the idea that maybe my task was to write a book to get as many people as possible acquainted with what I had experienced and what conclusions I had come to, I started writing it. Because of this, I began to thoroughly analyze my life. I was not a little surprised when I realized that there were a lot of strange and inexplicable events or premonitions of something that would happen in my life. I then understood this as a bit of a strange coincidence, but I thought it was normal, and that something like that is experienced by all people. And sometimes it wasn't the slightest hunch. When you know that someone close to you will die in 2 years. But I also saw one very positive thing. If the death candidates have started treatment in time and have changed their way of life, they are still alive. So man's destiny is not predetermined, but he himself influences it with his way of life. It was only when I observed these events after experience when I realized other realities and the eternal flow of energy and spiritual energy that it became clear to me that these events went beyond ordinary human understanding and common possibilities. I don't know if I'm right, but I think the reasons for those experiences of mine are the ability to see a little more or deeper than most people, but also a positive lifestyle. Even if I didn't figure out the reasons it happened, and I feel a great obligation to God. That was an amazing, amazing story. Thank you for listening.